Pastor Matthew Stuckey here, and I want to make a quick video here explaining how you count salvations when you talk to a large group of people. In the United States, where I'm from, when you do get the chance to preach the gospel, you're usually preaching to one person. And if not one person, two or at the most three. It's pretty rare that you talk to a large group of people. It's very different here in the Philippines, though, where you have opportunities to talk to sometimes 8 people at a time or 12 people. People often hang out in groups at parks, and sometimes you start talking and people are curious. They start surrounding you, and you're talking to a large group of people. Of course, other examples are preaching at funerals, preaching at weddings, preaching at events where you're talking to a large group of people, preaching at schools. The question is, well, how do you count salvations when you're in situations like that? Now, when you're just preaching like at a funeral or a wedding and you're not doing any interaction or any questions in between, I do believe that you should try to end with a prayer. And it's great if people believe in their heart and call on the Lord. I personally don't count any salvations when I've preached at weddings or funerals or large groups such as that, because I have not been able to interact with someone, so I can't really know. I mean, they might have prayed, but I haven't really asked them questions to see whether they believe it or not. And so what I instruct our church to do is just not count salvations in that opportunity. That's what we've done in the past in schools as well, is not count salvations. I will say, I've heard of people that have had the opportunity to preach in schools quite a bit that have developed a technique post-conversation by being able to ask direct questions and have a questionnaire to get a better idea of whether or not they got it or not. And I think that's a good method. I think it's something we can utilize in the future. But we want to be very cautious counting too many salvations, because it's more important to get the approval of God than it is the approval of man. I don't want to overcount our salvations. Here's what I find when I talk to a group of maybe 10 people in public. Usually when you're talking to a group of 10 people, not all of those 10 people are interested, and not all of those 10 people are actively following what you're saying or paying attention or getting involved in the conversation. What's interesting is you get to the end of the conversation and people that have not been interested at all sometimes pray. Should I count those people? Well, the way that I look at it is just, if they're not actively involved in the conversation, I cannot really know what is inside their heart. What you often find is there's a few people that are very active in the conversation, and then other people will kind of follow after and just kind of answer just like their friends answered, where they're not necessarily sure, or they're just kind of waiting for their friend to answer. And even if they answer correctly, I don't really know whether they believed it or not, because of the fact I don't know if that was in their heart or if they're just repeating what their friend said. And so it's obviously different depending on what group you talk to. Usually it is the minority of a big group that I would call active listeners. Usually the majority are kind of, passively listening, and they're kind of waiting for their friends to answer. I personally do not count salvations from people that are passive listeners, that are kind of just waiting for their friends to answer, and then they'll kind of just say an answer because they think, it's the correct answer that their friends have said, but they're not really sure themselves. It is possible for someone to be a bit in between being active and passive, where maybe they're more shy, but then they really seem to get it at the end. And then I think it's okay to count that salvation if they really seem to get it. But what you often find is you talk to a group of 10 people, there's 3 active listeners, and the 3 active listeners might get it, and the other people just kind of follow afterwards, and you're kind of left at the end. You look at your soul winning partner. It's like, how many salvations do you think I should count? Do you think I should count 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? And what I would suggest is, it's much more important to get the approval of God than the approval of man. So we should count at a low amount, because you just don't really know what's in the heart of everybody if they're just kind of a passive listener that is just following what their friends said. So I would say, count those that are active listeners. And on occasion, if someone's more of a passive listener, but you do get the opportunity to ask direct questions at the end to see if they've changed their mind and see whether they fully realize salvation can never be lost and they're putting their full belief on Jesus, then it could be somebody that you count. But it's extremely rare when I talk to a large group of people that I'm counting more than half of the salvations. And usually if I am counting more than half, we're talking to a group of like 5 people or 6 people or 7. But when I'm talking to a group of 15 people and 25 people, I'm never counting 15 salvations or near that amount, or 25. It would be a very, very rare situation. I know of somebody that came to the Philippines, and they had the opportunity to preach to a school of like 800 or 900 people. And this is not even a like-minded person at all, but they counted every single one as saved. And number one, you don't even know if they all prayed. But number two, just because they pray doesn't mean that they get it. And number three, I mean, when did you ask any questions to them to really figure out whether they got it or not? And so I would say that as a missionary in a country where we do have the opportunity to talk to large groups of people, take every opportunity you can get. Praise God for it. Be very conservative with how you count. And if you end up finding out when you go to heaven that you got more people saved than expected, praise God for that. But it's just kind of hard to tell unless we really find out in someone's own heart what they really believe. Anyways, thank you and God bless.